many people told me that sales workers were often chastised if they weren't hitting their sales goals, but they would be told that it's not because they were asking the wrong questions or going after the wrong customers. It was because their orgasmic energy was blocked up.
Welcome back to the Newcomer podcast. I'm Madeline here with my co-hosts Eric and Tom, and we're joined by Ellen Huet from Bloomberg to talk about her latest book, which just published, 2 weeks ago?
2 weeks ago.
Book hit the store, Empire of Orgasm, Sex, Power, and the Downfall of a Wellness Cult. So, salacious topic for the Newcomer podcast. Ready to dive in. Ellen, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
I want to quickly say before we jump into questions, Ellen, I remember going to Eric's wedding, I think the last time, or one of the last times you and I hung out, which is sad. It's been that long. And you were like deep in the throes of working on the book. And
I sure was.
You were barely conscious, I felt. Like things were intense for you.
That was 2023.
Yeah.
2022 and 2023 were I would say a moral low point for the book process, but overall, a very satisfying and rewarding and creatively challenging experience. If anyone ever wants tips on how to manage the soul aspect of writing a book, I can give you tips on that. Just hit me up.
Yeah.
And Ellen was my desk mate at Bloomberg when you first wrote the Business Week feature that
is right. Eric and I used to sit right next to each other. And as I like to tell people, he spoke so loudly while on the phone that if I happened to be on a phone call at the same time as him, people thought that Eric had joined our phone call. They were like, why is there a third person on our call? I thought it was just us. I'm like, no, it's my desk neighbor. I'll move.
Who builds an open office for the private active reporting?
Source calling, I know.
I blame Bloomberg on that one. And anyway,
I can relate to this too, Ellen, quickly. When Eric and I worked together at The Information, one time he sneezed and the guy on the other side of the line said, "Bless you."
That 100% checks out.
I want to be heard. I have a podcast.
He's expressive. He's expressive.
Well, we're excited to see all of that come to its culmination.
Yes,
culmination with this book. So people who haven't followed this closely don't know the whole story. There's so much to it. But give it a super high level. Yeah,
totally. Yeah. So I spent the last 5 years. I have been and am a reporter at Bloomberg. I'm a features writer. I write about tech and AI in Silicon Valley. But at the same time, in my nights and weekends, I have been spending the last 5 years working on this book, Empire of Orgasm, which, chronicles the rise and fall of this sex wellness cult called OneTaste. And OneTaste was a company that was started in San Francisco in 2004 by a woman named Nicole Daedone. And it grew fairly mainstream, despite the fact that its main business was selling courses on a sexual spiritual practice called orgasmic meditation, also known as OM or OM. And orgasmic meditation is a 15-minute partnered clitoral stroking meditative practice in which a stroker, usually a man who remains fully clothed, puts a glove on his left hand and some lube on his left index finger and strokes the clitoris of a woman who is naked only from the waist down for 15 minutes exactly. And the goal of the experience is for both parties to simply meditate on the sensations in their bodies during those 15 minutes, and that's it. And this practice, OM, was promised, if you were a regular practitioner, it was promised that you would not only have better sex, better relationships, better connection and intimacy with other human beings, but also that if you delved more deeply in the practice, that you might experience a better sense of your intuition and your desire, and maybe even a connection to the spiritual or the divine erotic energy that apparently is in the world all around us. And then fast forward to today, the leader and the second in command of this group have actually been indicted by the feds and were convicted in a criminal jury trial this summer in New York, and are currently in jail in Brooklyn for forced labor conspiracy, which we could get into, but it's a kind of a specific federal charge, and are currently in jail in Brooklyn awaiting sentencing, which will probably come early next year.
There's your afterword. I mean, there's so much to dive into with this topic. but I kind of actually want to start off with just you as a reporter on this, because you've been a startups reporter, at least while you've been at Bloomberg. And I think before that you were at the Chronicle and were like a crime reporter.
And I worked at Forbes for a brief stint too. But I was a breaking news and crime reporter at the Chronicle.
Yeah. But coming to this story, which, you really do tie up into the history of cults and wellness in the Bay Area, but also startup culture. I mean, specific to the startup side of things, like why to you was this a startup story? Like how is this wrapped into the kind of Bay Area business community and the mentality of people who kind of flock here for the very specific reasons that the Bay Area is, a startup world?
Yeah, I both recognize that it looks different than a lot of startups. And, I'm certainly not pretending it's exactly the same as them, but there are some striking similarities. Like Nicole really decided that the way to spread the mission and the message of this sexual practice that she believed in was not by starting like a media company or a nonprofit. It was by starting a for-profit business that was going to proselytize this thing. And at one point, OneTaste had the business mission statement of to bring capital O orgasm to 1 billion people. And to be clear, they redefined orgasm to mean more like a broadly defined erotic energy. But nevertheless, the mission statement to bring orgasm to 1 billion people. And it doesn't feel out of place if you remember the era of the WeWork mission statement to elevate the world's consciousness, or these things that, you might laugh at it, but they were really in the water in the 2010s.
Well, it's very Silicon Valley season 1.
Totally.
It's very Silicon Valley season 1. We are making the world a better place through B2B
they
SaaS.
Are.
But in this case, actually much more of a spiritual, physical practice.
Making the world a better place through orgasmic meditation. And they did lots of things that mimicked what tech companies and tech founders did at the time. Nicole gave this TEDx talk that was viewed on YouTube for, more than 2 million times. She spoke on stage at South by Southwest for an hour. She and her company even hosted these 2 conferences in 2013 and 2014 at the Regency Center in San Francisco, where, 1,000 people showed up for the whole weekend and wore those lanyards around their neck that, instead of saying like WWDC or like Google I/O, they happened to say Agent of Orgasm because the conference was about orgasmic meditation. But if you didn't know what they were gathering for, it would honestly look like a developers conference. And there was this sense that they were tapping into some of the ethos that was also really popular in San Francisco in the 2010s. And to be clear, they were also in New York, LA, Austin, Boulder, London, Australia. But in SF, you think about people who were moving to San Francisco. People were, exploring polyamory. People were doing biohacking. All of a sudden, this practice that is a 15-minute hack to a better life, it doesn't sound so out of place. And they even got endorsed by Tim Ferriss, who, of course, is kind of like a hero to a lot of people in tech who are looking for like peak performance, whether that's, mental or physical. And they used to set up booths at like the early morning sober dance parties that maybe you guys don't go to, but I definitely know people who have gone to those. And, they would hold OM workshops at Burning Man occasionally, or they would set up booths at like the Bulletproof coffee conferences. Like it was both interesting how what they were selling was quite fringe, and I'll acknowledge that, but it was also, they found footholds in what was kind of this growing mainstream, both wellness
it represents
and
so much like
culture.
The capitalism sort of ethos and aesthetic reached everything. I think once your sex cult decides, we should wrap ourselves in like the world of startups and business. It does say something in the culture about just the ascendancy of. And
don't forget, like
aesthetic.
The wellness industry was booming at the time. Nicole spoke on stage at the Goop Health Conference in 2017.
I was going to say, this is very Goop. Yeah.
It's very Goop. And of course, they managed to clinch that most important endorsement. Gwyneth is the queen of wellness alternative therapies. And at the same time, in the 2010s, there was also this desire to see female founders at the top of fast-growing startups. Like, I hate to use the term CEO, but remember we used to use that term like very seriously. Girl boss. Like there was just this energy that propelled the company, which was this mix of wellness, startups, female empowerment, female leaders, and just this idea that we can improve our bodies through a practice like this.
And Ellen, what's interesting to me too is you and I both grew up in the Bay Area. You're like you're a peninsula kid, right?
I'm from Fremont, so it's kind of like
Fremont.
Southeast Bay.
What is that? What is that? Southeast Bay? Okay. But yeah, I mean, like
somewhere in between.
yeah, it's Bay Area, but I don't know which one you call it. It's an 880. You're an 880.
Suburbs.
Kid.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, you see a lot about what makes this area interesting is that there does have this kind of leftover hippie mentality, very like one battle after another. These people who, try to change the world through cultural and maybe radical ideas that sort of settle into the sort of capitalist system that, is very rewarding to people, but you still hold on to your beliefs, your sort of somewhat leftist cultural beliefs. And they're always at conflict with each other, and you have to sort of resolve the conflict in some way. And, sometimes it just comes up, you're Steve Jobs and you make one of the greatest, most successful companies of all time. And then there's also the kind of scammy aspect of it in which like the two sides don't really meld all that well. And I think that's why something to a degree, One Touch only really could have existed in
right?
One Taste. I'm sorry. That One Taste, more than One Touch. One Taste could have only existed in the Bay Area because it's just it's something unique to the culture here, and why it was also ultimately so destructive, I think, and so damaging.
Well, and it's this
to the
mix
people.
it's this mix of like spiritual pursuits plus like this capitalistic energy that has, especially over the last couple of decades, become an inherent part of San Francisco and the Bay Area. It sounds kind of funny now because it's so ingrained in our thinking, but it was pretty radical 15 years ago to imagine using mindfulness and meditation to like improve your output at work. But that is such a bizarre combination that came about in San Francisco. It's like, what's interesting about OneTaste is it does bridge these like older and like this sense of kind of the spiritual new age seeker side of San Francisco, which has been around for decades. And then it happened to come about at this time when people were looking at those influences and then also asking themselves, how can we use this to make more money? You can imagine like the Wisdom 2.0 conference or like Google employee workshops on mindfulness in the workplace. Like those are all examples of that melding. And I think that melding is also what helped OneTaste be successful in this particular time and place.
Totally. I did want to say also what I found, when things, of course, inevitably take a turn with cults and sex and power, the blending of those two aspects of San Francisco culture were also apparent, right? Like people were simultaneously getting, into these complicated sexual dynamics with power plays that were also corrupted by not hitting their sales goals by selling the courses, right? So you would have simultaneously your cult leader also be your boss that's chastising you for underperforming at work. And it's kind of to blend that workaholic kind of capitalist ideal of bringing wellness to the masses through mass-produced courses, saw, many archetypes of the common takedown of a business that was run by an abusive boss, just as much as it was a sex cult leader that was manipulating people through really harmful relationships.
Yeah, I think more so than other hypothetical groups that people might imagine when they think of cults. You might have this kind of outdated idea that a cult is like a bearded man on a rural homestead with followers who all wear the same clothing and they do like an unusual
It's the
dance.
wild country, all the same like
exactly.
robes.
Yeah, people are thinking of that, but the truth is cults adapt with the times. This is one of the most interesting things that I learned while researching this book, is that they are constantly changing to reflect what people value, what people look at, what feels current. And so, when I talked to researchers who study cults, they were like, oh yeah, we expect that in the future, more than in the past, cult leaders might be women, or that they might have a presence that is very online, or that they might reach new followers through Instagram or have YouTube seminars, and you can see examples of these already popping up. And I think, what's fascinating is to realize that, they are also going to, they might end up looking more commercial. And what OneTaste did was, sure, it was this spiritual pursuit, but it was also like a business where they were very much, as you said, pushing to reach sales goals all the time. And in fact, you would see how the philosophies that underlined like their ideas of orgasmic living would also then push them to do more sales, or they would be interconnected in some way. Like, for example, many people told me that sales workers were often chastised if they weren't hitting their sales goals, but they would be told that it's not because they were asking the wrong questions or going after the wrong customers. It was because their orgasmic energy was blocked up. And so the solution that would help you make more sales was often that your manager or some leader above you in the group would say, you need to go have sex with someone, or you need to go have sex with your coworker. If two coworkers were disputing, people told me that they were sometimes instructed to go home together or have sex with each other as a way of like unblocking the sexual energy. So there's this unique mix of their spiritual teachings with this, this very nuts and bolts, like we need to be bringing in revenue to keep the business afloat.
This podcast is sponsored by Google. Hey folks, I'm Amar, product and design lead at Google DeepMind. We just launched a revamped vibe coding experience in AI Studio that lets you mix and match AI capabilities to turn your ideas into reality faster than ever. Just describe your app and Gemini will automatically wire up the right models and APIs for you. And if you need a spark, hit I'm feeling lucky and we'll help you get started. Head to ai.studio/build to create your first app.
Core to the crime here was what? Employees having sex with Nicole's boyfriend, who is basically a tech guy who is like throwing money around and keeping this thing afloat. Is that a fair gloss?
Right. Wasn't he their major angel investor, or basically their main investor?
Yeah. So in the early days of OneTaste, the company, as many startups are, was not profitable.
Relying on some guy.
It was losing money. They were paying, expenses like rent and money that they needed to run the business, and they weren't bringing enough through courses. And one of the ways that they ended up supporting the business and keeping it afloat was that Nicole happened to meet in the mid-2000s this man named Reese Jones, who is a venture capitalist. He had sold a company to Motorola in the early 2000s for about $200 million. And he later became involved with Singularity University. Like, he was very interested in esoteric topics and like the singularity and sort of science-y things like that. And he was also interested in OneTaste. And he and Nicole started dating. And what he did is he would pay for certain business expenses for the company. He would loan them money. And his repayment, instead of, maybe shares in the company, and this is documented in court testimony as well as in my reporting, he was rewarded with sexual favors by OneTaste employees. And that often looked like, these elaborate BDSM immersive sexual experiences for his birthday, which, again, according to court testimony, were themed after things like the 7 Deadly Sins or the Wizard of Oz. And he was also arranged to have a sexual handler, someone who was, there was a rotation of people who took this role, but they would do something like live with him, take care of some household tasks, maybe take care of his dog, and then sexually service him every day. And this was, so in some sense, again, it's like, a startup finds an early angel investor who believes in them and helps get them off the ground. But of course, the arrangement is very unusual and not something that I imagine is true of most startups.
Did it make good money at any point? Like, how did OneTaste the business?
They have said that at their peak, they brought in something like 12 million in revenue in 1 year. So again, in the grand scheme of companies that are often discussed on this podcast,
right?
Small potatoes.
That doesn't meet the Newcomer bar.
They had a 1 billion TAM, Ellen.
They had no outside investors. It was actually, at some point, I believe Nicole was something like the only shareholder.
Yeah.
So that, in the end, when she sold her stake in the company in 2017, that was before I had done any reporting on them. She apparently walked away with, something like $12 million.
You have to wonder, like, what percentage of people who, there's so many randos in tech that have sold their business for like $200 million. And to have that much money, some huge percentage of them have to be like trying to create like schemes, like, have little worlds that like revolve around them of different degrees of like sexual depravity. But you always wonder,
who
like,
knows,
is this
Eric, who knows what the post-economic get up to?
Now, right? Yeah, exactly. Was this guy just sloppy? It's like other people were like, had their lawyers more involved or were more buttoned up. Like,
who knows? Yeah. I couldn't say, but truly, if you have enough money to be post-economic, I think, as we've seen with many people in Silicon Valley, you're free to explore lots of interesting things. Like there are people who then go off and do a bunch of meditation, or they get really into like designer watches, or they start another company, or, it's like, that's the freedom that kind of money can get you, is you can pursue your interests.
Right. I mean, there is sort of this, like, I wouldn't call them middle class, but like kind of like an archipelago of decamillionaires and maybe some centimillionaires in the Bay Area that you don't think that much about, but that's, a huge amount of money to fund your pursuits, whatever they may be.
Fund your Burning Man camp. Fund a very, very expensive art car that you can trot around the playa.
Right.
Look, I'm sure that there's someone who's done
that.
that.
A good percentage of people do just fund it towards that, right? They funnel their money towards extremely elaborate Burning Man experiences. And that's, relatively non-destructive. It's hard to say. That's probably its own book.
Hey, they pick up the flyer, right?
They probably just start angel investing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you can do both, really. I mean, ideally. I can't believe I'm the one asking this question here, but it's just something that kind of came to me as we were, discussing this topic. But, like the mystification of the female orgasm, I feel like is this thing that, has been going on for some time. I mean, this idea of like, oh, it's this mysterious thing that, contains spiritual properties to it. And, it's more than just a biological act. There's some sort of like mystical, a thing going on here. Obviously that's a big part of female empowerment, I feel like. And, the way that, and like, look, in your book, you also talk about pickup culture being sort of interwoven into this culture too. Yeah. So it's like in one sense there's like high-minded feminine ideals, but also like the most misogynistic impulses of men on like how to break women down.
And the people coming into this community have been familiar with the pickup artist world, right? Wasn't that part of your book?
I mean, there were, essentially just to kind of situate OneTaste in time. It's like there were some men who maybe started off in the pickup artist community and then actually drifted toward OneTaste because they thought they didn't like the sort of misogynistic attitude of the pickup artist world and wanted to have something that was a little bit more spiritually inclined. But certainly that wasn't like a majority thing. But it just, if people remember what the energy of the world was like in 2005 when Neil Strauss's The Game was like at the top of the New York Times bestseller list, it's kind of like a marker in time. But Tom, to your question, or at least what I think you were getting at, I think that a major selling point of orgasmic meditation, of these courses that OneTaste was offering, is that sexuality is for a lot of people this puzzle, that maybe they've had a traumatic or complicated past, or maybe they're one of the estimated 10 to 15% of American women who struggle to have an orgasm, or maybe there's someone who struggles with performance anxiety during sex, or maybe you have a fulfilling partnership, but the physical spark isn't quite there, or something has changed. Like, I have a lot of compassion for people who were looking for answers as to these deep and really personal questions, in part because there are very few places where you can go to talk about them. And OneTaste was one of the few places that was really putting up a banner and saying, we will have straightforward, like really direct conversations about your sex life. And we have a promise that doing this practice, as confronting as you might consider it, is going to help. And so for people who are looking for answers and not finding that many places that are offering them, I think it made them more likely to want to see what OneTaste had to offer. And maybe even if they had some misgivings, to continue with the courses, because it's such a deep and primal human need to feel connected to other people in that way.
Which is what makes the exploitation even more gross. Right? Is that these are people who are seeking.
Because, orgasmic meditation, the practice, has a lot that is commendable about it. And I hope that, readers of Empire of Orgasm, like, come away with a nuanced understanding of what was being offered here. Like, it was a radically female focused pleasure practice. We don't have a lot of those. There was this commendable desire to kind of correct what they saw as an unfair focus on male pleasure in sex, or an unfair conditioning of women to feel like part of their job is to provide sexual pleasure to men rather than to like receive it. And so there's a lot that I think was genuinely valuable about the practice, and that people, even those who feel that they were mistreated or harmed by OneTaste, they've also expressed to me that they mourn the fact that this practice never really got the chance to shine on its own, separate from the
so
company that
for the
popularized
startup
it.
entrepreneur listening to this podcast, you think, OneTaste was just too soon? Like, it's like Andreessen Horowitz needs to, back the next version. You think there are, avoid a couple of the, pitfalls and
I mean, look,
playbook
I
back?
think sexuality, like, it's a tough business, and you'll probably struggle to like get banked by, and deal with payments and stuff. That being said, like over the course of my time as a reporter, I have occasionally talked to people who run companies and startups that are trying to help people like improve their sex lives or have like, they're really well intentioned, and it is a tough business, but these people are often quite motivated by the idea that it is, I think, if you can crack it, a huge market. And I think it's.
Do you remember when we went to South by Southwest together? I think you and I, as reporters, went to some party where it was like an app that was clearly like, I think, a sex worker app. Or are there always these? Do you remember that? You know what I'm talking about?
I vaguely remember that. I mean, it's like,
it was like one of the
people with good intentions are trying to do this. Yeah.
Well, we had a mean, and when I was in
people.
college. When I was in college, we had a founder. I think this was, about 7 years ago. But we had a founder who had gone to Barnard and had founded like this really feminine focused like sex toy company, and had raised some good venture capital funding, and was like packaging this. It was consumer packaged goods as a company. It was D2C, but it was is part of this sexuality wellness push. And her talking about it did come from a very, understandable and somewhat noble place, because, this is a gap, and this is a need that needs to be filled, and there is a market for it that in a healthy way. And so
more morally redeemed than gambling or whatever is in, the prediction
in vogue now,
right? Gambling, right? What's your view on capitalism now? You work for Bloomberg. We all write about money. Like this was sort of peak capitalism ethos. Like, I don't know what. Yeah, where do you think this is headed? Is it like just like whatever, this real need to sort of demystify, I don't know, the female orgasm or help people with sexuality? Like, is that a market? Will the market ever solve that, or you think it needs to exist outside of a company? Or any observations about the role for companies in these deep human problems?
I think it's an interesting question, because if you spend time in the in kind of the like sexual, spiritual communities, and there are a lot of places that will offer workshops about sexuality. People do sometimes debate the idea that like, can you sell this in a way that is never going to corrupt the offering? And I don't know. I mean, I believe that capitalism is pretty effective. Like it's hard for me to see that is inherently going to doom some project. I think you can probably have a business that is offering something really helpful and is charging money for it. And like, that seems to make sense to me. What I think happened at OneTaste is that, the personalities and the forces that were running this company were, Nicole is an interesting and fascinating character. And my read of her to some extent is that she experienced what she believes as personal growth through extreme experiences, sexual and otherwise. Like she also has talked about taking lots of drugs, taking lots of LSD in her past. And she believed that this form of pursuing personal growth worked for her and should work for other people. And so the culture within OneTaste was infused with this sense that extreme experiences and intensity were going to bring you personal growth. And for some people, that was true and it was helpful. And for some people, I think it led to really harmful places. And I think that that's more at the heart of it than the fact that they were charging money for it. I mean, to be clear, if you spend enough time in San Francisco,
it sort of
you will
fits
also
into the
find
startup story more in that, like, oh, great startups often attract these leaders who are like, see themselves as messiah-like figures. And sometimes that leads these companies to great success. And they also are like often antisocial personalities that treat people poorly. And then you layer in, she has access to all this sex to throw it around and control people with. It goes off the rails even more than just an Adam Newman who's, telling you how to live your life.
And keep in mind, like, if you're going to look at other startups and say like, oh, the fact that this company grew so big and had such a huge valuation, that was, if you try to say that that's what led to problems, well, it's like, yeah, OneTaste was never valued that highly. And
Right.
it's still, so I think money certainly played a role in some of the pressures that people felt within OneTaste, because there were times that they felt like, oh yeah, we really need to bring in a lot of revenue in order to keep the business going. And that led to this pressure cooker type environment. But I think the truth is the problems that people have described to me at this company have roots that go much deeper than simply the commercial aspect of it.
Right. And you think about like, the term that we use very literally is the cult of the founder. Like there is this sort of embrace within Silicon Valley on like these people they are imbued with unique properties that you just want to be around, and they will bring you towards enlightenment and fulfillment, whether it's capitalistic or sexual or otherwise. It's like there's something unique about these people that you just want to be around them. And even if the business model doesn't make sense, if there are things about what they're doing that like cross a huge number of your personal ethical boundaries, it doesn't matter because they figured it out. They know something greater. And like that's enough for people to invest in companies, for VCs at least.
I mean, cult dynamics exist on a spectrum. Cults exist on a spectrum. One takeaway I hope people take from the book is that it's a little, you kind of lose sight of the goal when you debate, like, is it a cult or not? It's more like, okay, what are some dynamics that exist commonly in cults, and are they present here or are they not present? And one of the things that cults do really well, and this can sometimes be a positive thing or a negative thing, is that they're very good at behavior change. So if you get enmeshed in one, like, your life will change. And so I think for a lot of these companies that have maybe like a reputation of having sort of like, oh, we're going to use the word cult to describe them in a lighthearted way, they might be gesturing at that. They might be gesturing at the fact that when you are part of this group, you feel like you have a new mission and there's a purpose, and maybe like it becomes a bigger part of your personality than just a normal employer or a normal workplace. And I'm not necessarily saying that that's inherently a bad thing. Like, I think if you really want to change your life, like some of these groups can offer.
It's true in relationships is everything. You are who you spend time with, and it's all just sort of a spectrum of how sort of coercive those things are. Madeline, you have a last question?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, I mean, is SoulCycle a cult? Like, that's a group that results in a lot of behavior change and chanting in some ways in a dark room with a leader. So,
well, one of the sort of obvious but interesting things about what makes people vulnerable to high demand groups or cults is that if they are feeling isolated or lonely or purposeless in their life, and then something comes along to offer it, then they might be more likely to be drawn in. And it's like if people aren't having regular access to moments of awe and wonder and transcendence and community, could something like SoulCycle help fill that gap? Sure. Could something like OneTaste fill that gap? Sure. Like, it speaks to, I think SoulCycle is like, somewhere on the spectrum, and OneTaste might be on a different spot on the spectrum, but their existence and their appeal speaks to this very universal human need that we need to fill that sense of awe and wonder.
I do think we have
a
core problem, just like people like going to church.
Not as much as they used to.
God is dead. Or it's like, for many, people don't believe in God anymore. I don't believe in God. If you don't believe in God, what are you supposed to do? It feels silly to like go to church. They search for all these other things. A lot of them pretty hollow. They only speak to, some of humanity. So I feel like we haven't as a society invented a church replacement that sort of covers the same ground.
I spoke to someone who is like a former cult member and who kind of is like a consultant that tries to help people leave high demand groups. And I asked her, like, if you could prescribe something broadly for society that would help lower the risk of people joining these damaging groups, what would you do? And she said, I really wish I could just bring back healthy religion. Like, she was like, if more people were religious, we would have less of this risk. And so obviously that comes with that's easier said than done. But I think it's speaking to something true about our digital age, our COVID era lives, like our increasingly secular lives. It creates this breeding ground where people are looking for meaning and sometimes finding it in the wrong place.
There's a unicorn company to come out of this. Somebody. Sorry.
and representative of the era, I guess. That feels like as good a place as any
that's great.
to end it. I really want to have like a Larry King Live like ending. Like the book is called Empire of Orgasm.
Yes.
Ellen Huet.
Please, Empire of Orgasm. It's out now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Find it wherever you find your books. Amazon, bookshop, your local bookstore.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me on.
Oh, I didn't even get to ask you about gooning. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the podcast. If you're new here, please like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. Listen in for new episodes every week wherever you get your podcasts.